I call the honourable member Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I also add my congratulations to your recent appointment as Assistant Speaker. And just to say this, Mr. Speaker, it's wonderful to see a person in a job like yours enjoying himself so much. Every time you're in the chair or there as either of the two chairs, there's a sense in your face of a person really enjoying what he's doing. And I commend you for that sense of spirit, but I also sincerely, as a friend and colleague, congratulate you on your appointment. Well made. It's interesting, my dear friend Tim McIndoe took more time to tell us how to save time on something that was inconsequential, but he didn't point to the real consequential parts of the Statutes Amendment Bill that we are debating today. My friend could have saved a bit of time. But Mr. McIndoe, the priceless piece, which will be difficult to capture, was when the Green member got the call ahead of you, and the look on your face. I'd pay money for that, and it was good to see you there as well. Mr. Speaker, the Statutes Amendment Bill is an important one, and it's one that is supposed to be non-controversial, and it's supposed to collect those technical pieces in legislation that need to be tidied up and brought to the House, and as others have said, generally it tends to be something non-controversial, and most sides agree. And I remember saying, I noticed Mr. Bakshi took a call earlier, and in classic Bakshi fashion, it was brief, and he supported the bill.
Order. The member must use his full name, the member's full name.
I'm sorry, sir. The honourable member, Mr. Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi. Typical fashion was brief. But it was interesting that the House has taken, Mr. McIndoe might like to take note of this point, the House has taken a lot of time in a private member's bill on the military manoeuvres bill that is to be repealed. That bill probably belonged here, one short paragraph, we would have agreed, and it's an omnibus bill of this nature that should also address that type of provision. Mr. Speaker, there are clearly many good provisions in this particular bill, and I want to talk about a couple of them. There's a series of changes around the Charities Commission. Now, we all know this commission has, in the past 5 or 6 years, carefully established itself and is now a key part of the NGO sector, the charity sector, and really is making huge strides in how it operates and how it is regulating, if you like, many of the charities. And so its work is quite important. We have a number of amendments here, and most of them are fine and non-controversial. However, there are some measures in this particular bill that will require close scrutiny of the Select Committee. And it's in the Charities Commission area that there is a case to be made. Section 40 makes an amendment to include a requirement that the entity, the charities, the NGO that's applying to be a charity, has to inform the Charities Commission if an officer subsequently becomes disqualified under the Act. Now, it seems reasonable, and on the face of it, innocuous, etc. But it's little amendments of this nature that begins to place quite a huge burden on charities, and they will need to watch out for and set up a system. So whoever it is that falls foul and becomes disqualified under this Act, that has to be reported. How far it goes, in what areas, there's no guidance on that at all. So the Labour believes that this could place considerable burden on small entities that may not be aware of this requirement. Well, that can be easily fixed. But if this is to be supported, this particular amendment, it needs to be accompanied by an awareness-raising and training program amongst smaller entities as well. And a second point about this is really about the implications. If an entity fails to meet the requirements of the proposed amendment, what then? What is to happen to those entities? And that also is something that the Select Committee might need to follow up. So there are a number of points like that that need to be made about some of the provisions here. But there is another point about the changes, amendments to the Charities Commission Act. Sometimes an amendment under a statutes amendment bill actually also takes away from the entity or from a particular bill to address more fundamental questions. And so while this bill makes 3 or 4 or 5 minor amendments to that act, clearly there was a need to look at the definitions of advocacy in the Charities Commission Act. And I do agree with my colleague from the Greens who raised this point as well. And that is problematic because the National Council of Women and a number of other major charities have now actually been unable to be registered as charities, and yet who would argue in this House that the work they do is charitable and therefore ought to be caught by the Charities Commission Act? So here's a major area that the Minister has not taken up and not likely to do so until the 2015 review of that particular act, but its implications are serious now. So there are many opportunities to have addressed more fundamental questions that have not been taken up, and by making minor amendments of the type that are made here, we lose that opportunity, and it will be some time before we will get back to that. So, but in any case, even the changes that are being made here to the Charities Commission Act has some implications, and the Select Committee will need to examine that as well. There are many other minor changes in this particular bill that my colleagues have referred to. And I was interested in one that has to do with which one is it, the Marriages Act, I think, the Marriages Act, where it really says you don't need to be a New Zealander to actually to get a license to do that. And I think it makes that particular minor change. And I'm glad that kind of change is there because it does reflect the diversification of New Zealand society. And there are many, many other cultural ethnic groups living in our society who will not meet the present provisions, and yet it's good to see a bill like this making that small change, which will be important for those who are applying, but it also begins to give quite an important symbolic message to New Zealand and to this House, I guess, that going forward our bills will need to take into account the diversification of our society as well. There are some changes here to domestic violence, and again, a minor change and nothing to quibble about. But indeed, the area of domestic violence in itself requires a lot more attention of this House than it has received so far. While there are programs out there that are underway to begin to address domestic violence in our society, we need to do a lot more, and this can't be all that we'll do. There are debates going on about whether our funding is in the right place and whether it is the right amount of funding. We tend to be very shy at actually committing to a program of action that we know will need to go for about 10 years before we can really begin to make a dent at our rather abysmal domestic violence rates. And yet we tend, after 2 or 3 years, to play around with the resourcing of those programs and indeed some of the rules around that need to be strengthened, which are not being strengthened, and yet some others are. So here, while there is another change, it's another example of how an area that should take into account, should demand much greater attention of this particular House, not receiving that particular attention. So, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of areas to take up from this particular bill. They appear to be non-controversial, but their implications are quite serious. And I hope that, and I've spoken to one or two of them, and I trust that the Select Committee will take them up, and I look forward to seeing that when it comes back to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call